Hello, my name is Susanne Evans and welcome to the Change Stories podcast. This is a podcast for people who are interested in creating change, whether that is within organisations or for individuals. In each podcast episode, I will have a conversation with someone about their work to share their story. Each story and conversation will provide you with ideas and inspiration for your own organisation or for you personally. To find out more about each episode, including further reading, and to share your change stories, go to www.changestories.co.uk. Hello and welcome to the Change Stories podcast. My guest today is Ket Patel. Ket is a Change Management Institute accredited Change Manager Master Practitioner. He has over 20 years of hands-on experience leading change and transformation within financial services, technology services, and the consulting industries. Ket has a passion for taking lessons identified from projects, industry, and personal experience and helping others find ways to apply them to help ensure change benefits are realised, change resistance is minimised, and change is adopted and sustained by focusing on the health and well-being of all of those impacted by change. Ket is UK Collaborations Lead for the Change Management Institute, a professional body dedicated to establishing and promoting best practice in the delivery of change. In his role, he works to build relationships with industry bodies and academia, raising awareness of the Institute and promoting good practice in order to progress adoption of change practices. Ket is also the founder of Change Reactions, a community space dedicated to helping people find careers in change and in supporting them develop the behaviours and practices that will help them lead change effectively. Thank you so much for coming onto the podcast today.
Oh, thanks for coming. I didn't realise it was such a lengthy intro. I should have cut it down for you. Yes, I know. I'm so sorry.
Relevant.
Yeah. When you hear someone else read it, listen to it back, you're like, actually, I should cut that down a little bit.
I think it's an excellent introduction because actually you have fingers in many pies.
I do, yeah. I do like to keep myself busy, and you know, I'm so passionately into change in its many forms. So it's hard not to have a lot to say about it and be involved in a lot of different bits.
I really wanted to chat to you about your newish project, which is Change Reactions, and the community space that you've created for people getting started on their career in change or wanting to know more about having a career in change. What prompted you to set up Change Reactions in the first place?
Oh, God. I mean, it's been an idea that's in the round has been in the back of my mind, and it was sparked by various conversations with other practitioners and a reflection on how I found myself in change management. And generally the story I found was this, that people would come in to do a specific job. Like I was an operations analyst. I was sort of managing data on behalf of clients. And I got more involved in improvements to our processes. And I slowly became involved in projects on a more strategic scale. And then I fell into doing more and more projects because I kind of enjoyed and liked doing the sort of time cost, people element. But what I recognized is that we were really bad at sort of telling people why we were doing it and getting them ready for it and all those sorts of things. So I just started doing more of that as part of my projects. And before, I can't remember, one of my bosses said to me at the time, "You'd make a really good change agent." And I'd never heard the phrase before. And I looked it up and I was like, oh, that actually sounds quite good. I get that. I want to be someone who kind of creates an environment for change to take place and want to support people. And so weirdly, I kind of just started doing more of the stuff I was doing, but within this role of project management, but no one else was really interested at all. The sponsors weren't particularly going, yeah, we need to do this better. They weren't even talking about it, to be honest with you. Change was about training and comms, and that stuff would often get left behind, right? So
Still happens.
Still happens, right? But so long story short, I just started to kind of expose myself to it. Then I learned of the Change Management Institute, which you mentioned. And I just found that there was this whole other group of people who actually did this kind of job that I liked the sound of, but didn't realise was an actual job. And lo and behold, that was like 8 years into my career, 10 years into my career of sort of projects. And ever since then, I've spoken to people and they've had a similar journey. They've started off in a certain place. They've got exposed to projects. They've realised their organisation doesn't particularly do the people aspects of it well, and they fall into change management. So I thought it was curious that was the path most people found. But what I've most recently recognised I've done quite a bit of work with sort of junior sort of practitioners, if you like. They've got all the skills that I would expect an experienced practitioner to have, but without the experience. And what struck me as in my head was I could easily have gone a completely different route at any point in those years prior to kind of finding change management. And the reason I didn't is I inherently believe like we were doing change wrong and we could do it better. But a lot of people who would be in that position probably don't make that realization, probably don't go, actually, there's a career in this, and find something else. So we lose a lot of potential talent. And that's because we don't go from university leaver to change practitioner in a structured way. It's sort of left to chance, if you like. So I felt there was a need to kind of bridge the gap between what is, seen as a career from the moment you leave university, or even as you're doing your degree, and even sooner, to be honest, there's no reason you need to do a degree. It can be a college kind of entry level, to becoming a change practitioner and really thinking about it as a career. That's why I'm setting up Change Reactions, because I kind of want to promote it at that level. Like there's a lot being done elsewhere at the kind of more experienced level. But yeah, Change Reactions is really about trying to engage a younger audience to come and find this profession and see if it's for them.
It's so interesting because I think back to myself at university and then into my first graduate job, and I wouldn't have been able to tell you at that point what change management was, or that even it was a job. I mean, obviously this was a significant period of time ago, but it's something that I suppose I fell into a bit like you were saying. So I started off in consulting, but it was HR consulting, and sometimes we did a bit of change, but we never did. I didn't do any sort of professional qualifications in it, and I learned how to do it on the job to a certain extent. And I think it's so interesting to think how amazing it would be to have a group of people who actually are interested in it as a career, know what it is, and know the steps that they need to take to get to be competent and proficient. And how great that would be, not only for the profession, but also for organisations, if they have people coming through who actually are approaching it with an understanding of the role and an understanding of what they need to do and how to do change well.
Yeah, I mean, that's essentially kind of my own thinking, is that it's just a different way to tackle the problem I see of, A, is change management valued by organisations? And B, are people in organisations ready to navigate change? It just feels like the work that's been done from a professional perspective is generally aimed at people already in their roles, already navigating changes, but maybe in various, with various levels of effect. And it just feels like this is sort of the way I likened it. Actually, I did an article at the beginning of last year, and the one of the reasons this kind of snowballed for me was I was asked to write an article that was sort of maybe a bit provocative, and I kind of was looking around. And the thing that really struck me was all the things the industry may have done over the last 10 years. There was a study by ProSci, and they do it annually to look at how many organizations have a strategic function for change, the CMO. And they'd moved from their analysis back in 2009. There was like 36% of organizations surveyed had a CMO. And then 10 years later in 2019, there was 40%. And I went, so for 10 years worth of us talking about it, not to have a go at the progress that's been made, but in 10 years, and there's a lot of talk, we've made 10% gain. What is going on there? If I use that as a measurement, there's something that we're missing. And for me, it was this realization, and I can't remember how I came across it. I was looking at, I used the analogy of the fire service, and I actually started looking into it, and I was like, actually, this is exactly the case. In the UK, the fire service had reduced its headcount by about 40%, yet the reduction in fires had also reduced by around the same number. And looking into it, the reason was they were getting out and they were talking to people as a preventative measure. They were spending more effort looking at how to prevent fires than getting out and fighting the ones that come. And I went, what if we did that for change? What if we educated people before they even experienced an organisational change to be ready to undertake one? Would that create a different kind of organisation? And the hypothesis is it would.
Yeah.
But we got to start somewhere. So I'm starting with getting more people interested in it, and then seeing where it goes. But yeah, it was just that was kind of where it came from, really. It's like just a couple of ideas coming together.
And I think that's a good point, because I think I've seen a shift too in organisations, and they kind of flip-flop, don't they, between we're going to have an internal change function to we're going to give managers the skills, or we're going to get people in, specialists in to do change, and then they can go away again. And there's been and certainly across my career, there's been a sort of a circling around that. And they keep changing their minds about what's the best thing to do. But actually, I'm with you. I think given the environment we're in now, my personal view is we need to move away from this idea of change being a discrete thing that happens on a project and then the project stops and then the change goes away. We have to be in an environment now where the change is ongoing. It's not related to a big technology transformation or whatever. It's just things that are happening in the organisation. And if we can prepare people at all levels in the organisation to be able to deal with that change in a way that's best for them and for the people, and do the people stuff well, as you said, then that's got to be good. And whether that's within a change function or not, it needs to be living somewhere in the organisation. And ideally, actually, it needs to be so that people at all levels feel empowered to create change rather than waiting for someone else to come and do it for them.
Yeah, you're spot on. And I think that's, like the big goal. So again, sort of thinking the repercussions of doing this is exactly as you said, right? I did a talk recently where I was just trying to position why do we have change management at all? And one of the things is I think most established organizations don't recognize they have a friction self-created between these project entities that they spin up and the operations teams that they've got managing day to day. And change management really is about oiling that friction. It really is about trying to create a seamless exchange between project idea and delivery into business as usual. But the mindsets of those two groups is very different. I remember when I was an operations person, my job was to make sure things went out predictably, on time, and with the least amount of risk. Right? That is keep everything stable, deliver everything to high quality, make sure it goes out as expected. A project is dealing with the other type, like they're all about risk, right? They're all about taking new things and going down paths that are never been tried before. And so the mindset of bringing these two parts of an organization together is in itself experiencing friction, because it's almost like I don't like introducing instability to my operating world, and because that's not what I get paid to do. And now you're asking me to do it, and you're asking me to do it on top of everything else that I am doing. You can kind of just see that if there isn't something oiling that friction, this is why it takes so long to embed a change. So the kind of realization, extending, thinking about how do you get people younger in their careers into change and make them aware that it's a potential, is those key points in an organization, those transition points from project into business as usual, they also need a level of skill around thinking not about stability, but thinking about, adjusting our current operating model to support new things coming in and empowering their teams to do so. And that's another whole other area that is potentially something that's missed. And you said it just at the beginning of that bit, right? Was we flip between wanting to bring an external organization in to do it for us, but to getting other people to do it inside our business. But we don't really arm people with the right skills to do it internally. So yeah, I think there's a lot. I could just see so many other avenues to try and tackle this problem that haven't been tried before. But maybe they have. I don't know.
I think you're right. And I think the other thing, and you alluded to it, is around capacity. And I think this is why a lot of organisations rely on getting external support in to deal with change, because they either don't have the skills to do it in-house, or they're asking people to do it on top of the day job. And you alluded to that when you were talking about operational managers. And it's too much for people. You know, if they have a full-time day job, you can't then expect them to run a project on the side. But I've seen that hundreds of times. I'm sure you have too. And so I think it is about making sure that there's people in the organisation who really get this stuff. And maybe that's what they do all the time. You know, you call them what you want, a change agent or a CMO or whatever. But someone in the organisation needs to have that capability. But it's also about giving everyone in the organisation, as you say, the skills and the knowledge to provide that support and to move something from project to business as usual.
Yeah, and I'm glad you picked up on that, because it was hidden in that statement, right? That this sort of lack of capacity. And I'm interested in kind of how you've seen organisations as well navigate well or not so well that problem, because one of the things I do with line managers in that situation is I'm really conscious to say, look, no one is going to give you extra capacity to do the day job, if I'm honest. And even if they did, if we went and hired a whole bunch of people, there's a ramp up cost to that. So what's the next best thing? Well, the reality is there's got to be some stuff we're willing to put at risk in the business as usual that we can present. Not only can we present as we're going to put these things at risk in order to create space for these new things, but we're also going to take these actions were these risks to materialize. We're going to mitigate them in some way. And the powerful thing that's done for people in that situation is it gives them control. It gives them some level of decision making that says, look, you want me to do that and you want me to do this. Well, I can't do both unless you're willing to accept some level of risk. And here's where the risk is going to be introduced. But as long as you, my line manager, boss, sponsor, accept that we're going to introduce this level of risk, and these are the mitigations, then you're asking me to do something that's impossible, and we're creating a scenario where we're likely to fail. So why not have a more open conversation around where we would want to introduce risk to get this change done? And that seems to be generally sort of really empowering to the line manager, but also quite reassuring to the project delivery, that you kind of have gone, okay, well, we know where the risk exists now. We know what might trip us up. So I just think people don't want to have the conversation a lot of the time.
No, I'm nodding away while you're talking. And I think the common theme in my work is about that exact point. It's having really open and honest conversations about change and about what's going to happen and about what's possible and what's not possible. And I think often people in organisations and leaders aren't necessarily willing to engage in those sorts of conversations, or to have that really, I suppose, grown up. I'm always using the word grown up, but I think, we're all adults. We should all treat each other like adults and just be honest about some of this stuff.
I question that sometimes, though. I really do, and I think, I have to hold myself back, because you're right. Like, it's not is it a helpful term? Like, we're all adults. I think sometimes, I think there is some structural things that play against us wanting to act as adults, and it's like play the game, right? So if you're a senior director and you're responsible for a change, right, you want your change to be successful, but you also want all the other things you've got going on to be successful, and there's a trade-off, and it's your credibility, and so you're going to solve the problem the least difficult way for you, which might be not the best, but it serves your needs, which is fine. But you've just got to understand the trade-off of making that. Like, it might not actually get you the end result you want, but if the organisation sees it as a win, then it does get you the result, just not an overall outcome for the business. So it's just, I just think it is about creating awareness and then taking an active decision. Like, I don't mind if someone doesn't want to do that and would rather let it fail in a different way or take risk in a different way. But at least they had an open conversation around the fact that they had a couple of different options and they made a choice, as opposed to just blindly going down a road. And I think that's the main thing. Like, it's creating a space to realize there are choices and we actively make one, and then we can deal with the consequences of that, as opposed to just being surprised at the end.
Yeah, you're exactly right. It is that choice, because I think often people don't feel they have a choice. A project I worked on a while ago, it was a big tech implementation, and the build was taking longer than I think they had hoped on the project. And so there was this huge gap in telling the organisation what was going to happen and when and what it was going to look like and all that. And people in the organisation were absolutely clamouring for, give me some information, because it was going to change the way people did their jobs. But the project team said, no, we're not going to communicate anything until we can communicate everything. That's a choice. And I thought it was the wrong choice, but that's what they stuck to. And I think the bit that was missing from what you were just saying is a reflection on, we're making this choice because we feel like it's the right thing to do. Others might disagree. This is the risk of doing it this way. And I think that's the part that's missing in a lot of change programs, is that reflection on, we're making this choice. Are there other things we could do? Or we're making this choice, we think it's the right thing to do, and this is what's going to happen as a result.
Yeah. And I get it, right? Like, there's always this pressure to be moving forward. And again, there's a level of like, well, I'm the decision maker here. I know best, to some extent comes out. And that's all fine still. But just taking that moment longer, and it is really a moment, like it's one of the meetings in the many meetings we have, to present three options. And I always say three, right? There's the do what you're going to do something different, do nothing at all. And just assess them in an hour, and then make a decision and move on with your life. Like, it's that, right? But it's yeah. I don't think people necessarily immediately see the value. I think the thing is, they think it slows things down, and it might do fractionally, but it also might give you that moment to say, no, actually, it's not the right decision now. Thinking about it, there's a couple of other things we could do. Let's try them first. So yeah, there's definitely a need to kind of be more mindful about decision making.
Yeah, and I think you've hit the nail on the head there about time. I think all the projects I've ever worked on, there's been this momentum to it, and an unwillingness by people leading the project to stop or pause, despite the fact that actually it's really beneficial to pause. And in my own research, I have shown that that's the case. If you take a bit of time to reflect, it has benefits on how well, and I'm doing that in inverted commas, you can't see, but I am, a change is implemented. And but I think they just take on a life of their own. And some of that, I think, is down to project plans and a lot of change being driven by a project plan rather than being driven by what actually the business can cope with or what's best for the people in the organisation. But also, I think there's a certain amount of sort of face saving going on by some of the senior people, that any sort of delay is seen as a bad thing, and that stops people from stopping.
Yeah, completely. And I think there's, like one of the other things I've been looking at recently is we talk about this sort of, a project is, the coming together of various teams for a defined period of time to deliver an outcome, right? But when you actually look at the way projects work, I still think they're incredibly siloed. Many of the teams on them aren't really looking at what everybody else is doing. They aren't really trying to get an understanding of the holistic picture and the path. There might be someone pulling a plan together, but no one's really looking at what everyone else is doing and going, is that going to suit us? Does my decision here affect your decision there? And I spend a good amount of my time trying to create dialogue amongst project team members around the different decisions they're making and how they impact one another. Because it's fun, it's really curious. You go into like program or delivery boards, and someone says, "Oh, I've got this thing, and it's going to delay us by 2 weeks," and someone else says, "Well, that's going to move this out by 2 weeks," and it's like the first time they're hearing about it, and you're like, "But we're meant to be a team driving for an outcome. How is this being allowed to be the environment in which we work?" So there's a lot of change thinking that other change professionals could do with knowing. And I think that's also a potential source of improvement in organizations, is that when we form project teams, we actually have to do that bit where we become a team, not and the typical thing I experience is like you see like here's a terms of reference for the program board, and here's this team, and here's an org structure, but it's all very mechanical. And what I think is missing is like there's real human beings doing the work in this environment, and we all depend on one another for various things. Do we understand how each team works? Do we understand what their inputs and outputs are? Do we know what happens if I'm late and I depend on you for something? None of those conversations really happen unless something materializes. And it can't be centered on a project manager to do that. It's just there's too much going on for it to be on one person. So yeah, I think there's also huge opportunity to kind of educate that thinking that a change manager does to other people on a project for delivering change.
And how do we get better at doing that then? Is it a question of upskilling or acknowledging people, or is it about creating different processes or ways of working? What needs to happen?
Well, I don't have a single answer. I think one of the things you mentioned one of my other roles, which is this sort of collaborations lead with Change Management Institute. And one of the reasons I started to focus more on this area was because change management wasn't that well known generally. And also some of the other key business teams we work with, business analysts, project managers, HR, do they really understand what our purpose is? There's overlap in places. There's distinct responsibility in others. Are we clear? How can we get better at it? How can we work more effectively together? So much of that collaboration stuff is all about trying to raise awareness in other forums about the work we do, but also learn from others about what they're doing, bits of change thinking they're already applying, bits of other stuff that they're doing within sort of organizational change. So I think there is just general raising the awareness beyond change practitioners. So to other people who are involved in change. I think the tech world is another example where, I get to experience a lot of organizations that buy external technology, software as a service, but then when they bring it in, the tech teams are kind of going, well, look, here it is, box, open it, there's some instructions, we'll help you get it installed. We're not going to really touch how you people use it. Like that's, you can figure that stuff out. And actually, I do think there's a huge responsibility from a technology organization's perspective to help an organization, help the people learn how to best use the tools. So I think there's also a gap there. And again, it's about, well, what benefit does it bring all these organizations? Well, hopefully it enriches all of our roles when we're on projects, makes the outcome more likely to be attainable in a shorter time frame, hopefully realizing our benefits. It's sort of, hopefully, the ideal is it helps everybody's job become a little bit more achievable and make it easier for us to work.
Yes. And I think,
I'm sure there's countless other ways as well.
Well, I think you're right. I think it is about almost equipping people who are professional change people with the skills to knit things together and join things together.
Yeah.
I think it's also then equipping people who don't have a sort of formal change role, but will be experiencing change in the organisation, because everybody does, with the knowledge, the skills, the ability to be resilient through change, to support change. And I think it's like two sides of it. And I think you and I have talked about it before, but I actually think one of the biggest issues is it's really hard sometimes to explain what change management actually is to people. You know, I know we've talked about it. How do you introduce yourself and explain what you do? It's not that easy, is it?
Oh God, truth bomb time. It depends how long I've got with somebody. If it's a passing, I don't know you that well, I'm probably, if I'm honest, going to say I'm a project manager because everybody knows what it is. It's a cop-out, I know, and I'm very conscious of it. But I actually do struggle because, and I can't remember, maybe it was you and I that talked about this last time we caught up, but I feel like I need to own it a little bit more as well. I'm scared of people going, I don't know, what is that? I don't get it. And then having to fumble around for a better answer. Or people looking at it. Like my wife's a great sounding board for this because she genuinely doesn't believe project management or change management is required. And actually, there's a good question there. I actually now, after many years of hearing it, have actually come to believe she's absolutely right. But I have not found a way to explain to people that our reaction to being asked to make changes needs a level of support that isn't naturally available to you. And even that in itself sounds okay, but if you tried to tell someone that's a job, I'm pretty sure they're going to laugh at you. So yeah, I don't know, but I think I need to own it a bit more going forward. That's for sure.
I absolutely agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm in exactly the same place, and I think.
Do you have a good answer?
I think an excellent answer. I think we maybe that's something we need to work on.
I was going to say, but do you have a good answer? Have you got something that you use? I mean, I don't know.
No, not really. I think a bit like you. It depends who I'm speaking to. If it's someone that I don't know very well and I haven't got a lot of time to explain what I do, I tend to say that I'm a management consultant. That's what I do because it's easier. Because I do change stuff, but I do also do some HR stuff, so it kind of covers everything. If they then say, "Well, what does that mean?" then
I'm a project manager.
Then I'll go into I support organisations that are going through periods of change. But a friend of mine asked me a while back, what does that mean? And she said, does it mean that you do mergers and acquisitions? And I said, well, sometimes.
Yeah.
I said, but it could be anything. It could be an introduction of something big, like a merger and acquisition, or it could be something quite small, like moving from one building to another. But all of that is change, and it's difficult sometimes for people to cope with, and I'm there to help. But it's still a bit nebulous. So I agree. I'm gonna figure it out, and then I'll tell you how I'm going to.
My figuring it out is I think people, to make it easier for me to explain what I do, I need people to care a little bit more about their own experience of change.
Yes.
And you'll see through my LinkedIn posts, right? It's like a lot of the stuff I post about is sort of almost like a personal reflection of the way I might have experienced a change. And hopefully it gets people to stop and think for themselves, or how might I have done that? Or when have I had something similar? Or, oh, that's actually really useful because I've just had a change that's come up that I wasn't really thinking those. And I do think that's kind of the way it makes this description easier, right? When people have a better appreciation for this is why project management is so obvious. People know what project management is. It's managing a list of tasks. Everyone does it pretty much every day if they think about it. But they don't think about change the way they think about project management every day, yet they do it. They go through change at various degrees in their own lives, and they have to equip themselves with the support, the capacity, right, to navigate it. And so in that respect, everybody should know what change is, but they're not recognizing it yet. And I think that's the other part of, the work I enjoy doing is trying to awaken within individuals their own understanding of what change is for them, because that also leads to some really potentially powerful stuff for organizations. But yeah, that's probably, I think, the only way I'm going to get around being comfortable telling people about change management is that they understand what it is before I tell them.
And I think I absolutely agree with you. And I think part of the problem is in a lot of people's heads, change management and project management are the same thing. Because their experience of change in their professional life certainly is around being a project happening. Either they were involved in it or it happened to them in the organisation. And as a result of that project, some change occurred. And I think sometimes the two things get conflated together.
Oh, completely. Yeah. And me saying I'm a project manager does not help the situation.
You are part of the problem.
I am clearly part of the problem. And I think I need to change my ways immediately, which I'm going to do as a result of this conversation.
But then I'm part of the problem too, because I don't explain it in a way that enables people to understand it. And I think the point that absolutely I agree with from what you were saying previously is it's about making people care about it. So everyone can think about a time when they were in an organisation and change was done to them badly. Everyone's got an experience of that. And I think it's about drawing people back to that and said, actually, if at that time, the organisation that you worked in had some professional change management support. Now, whether that's internal or external, it doesn't matter. Or people knew how to do change well for people, then that probably wouldn't have happened. And that's what we do, is to enable individuals and organisations to get better at doing change.
Exactly.
So there you go, a bit of homework for both of us to try and figure out how to explain what we do for a living.
Yeah. Exactly, or probably more importantly, just be okay being uncomfortable trying to explain it, which is where I kind of default hide. Right, is I don't want to have this conversation right now, so I'll just say project manager instead.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier about, and I wanted to come back to it, about how your wife is of the view that change management is not necessary, and how you're coming round to that view.
Yeah.
Does that link into, I know, other pieces of work that you're doing, which is around building capacity and capability for change within an organisation so that managers and employees can just do it for themselves? Is that where that links together?
Yeah, it absolutely does. And again, I have to say she's right. Damn, she's right. So let me reflect on a conversation I had with this guy I randomly met through LinkedIn, right? And he is what he calls himself a business architect. And I had this conversation where I'd never met him before, just interacted on LinkedIn. And we had this conversation, and straight off the bat, I just kind of said, "Oh, I'm a project manager." He goes, "Why do you do project? We don't need project management. What's project management ever doing? It never brings any good to an organisation." It was really kind of quite, I'd say aggressive, but it wasn't really aggressive. I was just shocked that someone said project management wasn't important in companies. But as I sat with it, and actually as a part of almost looking back over COVID as well, I kind of went, the reason we have project management is because we want the organisation to be stable, right? But we also want to do all these new cool things. And we haven't found a way to make that happen. So we've created project managers to manage these people, and we've created change managers to help us put it into the business. It's an artificial construct of the way we've built a business. So in reality, if we built the business a different way, and that was, we built from the very ground up, and this is difficult for established organizations, but for every new organization, if they built change capability right from the very beginning, would you need change managers? I don't think you would. If you resourced your people who had the skills and you told them this was part of your job, would you need change managers? No, I don't think you would. So it's an outcome of the way we've built an organization that makes us needed, but quite easily we could not need dedicated resource to do this, and it could just be part of the DNA of an organization if we built it that way. And that's the bit that's kind of intriguing, because loads of startups are starting now, and they start quite entrepreneurially, and they start doing all bits of everything, right? And it's only when they scale do they get mired by this need for process, need for separation between keeping everything the same to doing new stuff over there. And what happens is the thinking that goes along with keeping everything the same and the thinking that goes along with changing diverges. Two different groups. Whereas what you really want it to do is you can have those two different groups, but they both got to be thinking about the fact that they are responsible for delivering change to the organization. And so that for me is sort of like, that's why we don't need change management, really. It's an output of a way organizations are structured. So yeah, she's right.
Well, I'm inclined to agree, and I think it's the same is true of so many things in organisations. And it's like you look at any organisation structure chart, and it's like a sort of historical document, isn't it? I remember working on a project, a big organisational redesign years ago, and sitting there with the leadership team going through all the organisation charts, and there were some really weird roles and bits that were sort of coming off some of the charts. And I said, well, what is this? What does this bit do? And the guy I was speaking to went, oh, yeah, we had to create that years ago because so-and-so and so-and-so fell out and they couldn't work together anymore. So we had to create this department so that they could be separated. And I said, but they're not there anymore. Why is it still, oh, well, it seemed to work, so we just carried on. And I think that's the thing. It becomes almost like a big theme in my work is about history and archaeology and sort of digging down. And all of this stuff is like a reflection of what has gone past in the organisation, isn't it? It's, it's
a classic, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's the classic of why do we do it like that? Don't know, just do it.
Someone did it once and we just
Someone did it once. Yeah, exactly.
And that goes right back to what you were saying earlier about reflection, I think, and having the time and the space and the ability to reflect on stuff in organisations. So rather than just carrying on with something because that's how it's always been, is actually for it to be okay for someone to say, well, why do we do it like that? And then to make some changes to make it better.
Oh, completely. And I think, like that ability to reflect, right? Just pause for a moment and ask yourself the question, what role did I play in the outcome that just happened and what might we do different? Is really, really powerful and not leveraged enough, right? Because we're so heads down doing stuff. And actually something, if I may just briefly talk about, is although, I've got change reactions wanting to encourage a new group of, young professionals into this space, although I inherently believe we shouldn't need it at all. I do think one of the first places to start in creating what I'm calling an adaptable organisation is to empower that line manager, that middle place where the friction really occurs. And I'm working on something with a friend of mine that is aimed at bringing the best of coaching and change management together, aimed at line managers who need to change, who need to have dual thinking. They need to be able to manage the operations for stability, but they also need to be thinking about change for the organization. And they need to be managing that and creating that space for their teams by introducing risk and telling their bosses, by the way, you want us to change, we're going to introduce this risk. And I think that might be the key activity I can work on, right? Because it works on the programs I've worked on before where you kind of really empower that middle layer, because that can really speed up the delivery of change into teams. So that's something I'm really excited about working on this year, is sort of this focused effort around line managers and bringing coaching and change management together.
That sounds amazing. It's about democratizing change, isn't it? So that it
that's the word.
Goes away from being the preserve of a few knowledgeable souls to actually being something that anyone in the organisation can do, which I think is a brilliant development.
Yeah, and honestly, I think it's where we need to go as a profession. Look, the reality is we'll never get there, right? We'll always need some change professionals, so the role will develop into something else. So it's not something to fear either. Like if I say it and people go, "Well, what would I do instead?" Well, you don't worry, you'll still be needed, right? It's yeah. No, we're not. I mean, I'd like to, but I think it'll be slightly longer than that.
I think we're going to have to leave it there because we're running out of time, but it's been so fabulous to talk to you. I feel like there's a whole load of other conversations we could go off and have another time about things that we've touched on in our conversation. If people want to find out more about you and what you're doing, where's the best place for them to take a look?
I commit fully to using LinkedIn for most of my online presence. Change Reactions has a website, www.change-reactions.co.uk. But yeah, contact me on LinkedIn, Ket Patel. You'll find me posting relatively frequently about some nonsense that I'm experiencing within Change. And yeah, that's probably the best place. And you've got my contact details either on the website or on LinkedIn. So, and
your posts are excellent. I always enjoy them very much indeed.
I'm glad. Sometimes I feel like I'm just throwing nonsense into the ether, but it's a good. Yeah, actually, I don't know if I found LinkedIn to be really useful for just writing. I'm not the best at getting my thoughts out, but I found LinkedIn's quite useful in that respect because as long as you can just not be bothered about whether it does well or not, which I'm not, then it's a really good sounding board. And a top tip, actually, if I don't mind, because one of the things I do with my posts is I always use a kind of random hashtag. And the reason I do that is I find then I can look at that hashtag and I can find all the posts related to it. So if you ever do go in posting, any listeners, and you start posting, you kind of create a random hashtag to look back through all your content in the past. Really easy filing system, essentially.
That's such a good idea. What is your random hashtag? I feel like I need to know.
I've got a couple. So one is Change Doodles, which has got like all my sort of scrawlings. I've got like a little sketchbook sometimes. I come up with change, doodles. Ketisms was another one.
Like it.
And what was the other one? I had one other and I can't remember. Oh, Monday Musings.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
I've seen that one, I think.
Yeah, I haven't done one of those for ages. They've sort of... But I can just go back and look at the archives.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
brilliant.
Very, very handy. Oh, I'd like to share a little bit of something useful.
It's been a really useful discussion. I know that listeners will take a huge amount from it. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you so much for coming on and being my guest today.
Oh, I've loved it. I always love a conversation with you, Susanne.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Change Stories podcast. I love this conversation and I hope you did too. Thanks as ever to my wonderful guests and to Pete Morgan at Monkey Pants Productions for making the podcast sound amazing. If you want to find out more about this or any other episodes of Change Stories, go to www.changestories.co.uk where you will find all the episodes and show notes. If you have enjoyed listening, please rate and review the Change Stories podcast on your podcast listening platform. And do please let me know if you have ideas or requests for future episodes. You can contact me and find out more about change and storytelling on my website, www.feldsparconsulting.com. Thanks again for joining in with the Change Stories conversation.
This has been a Monkey Pants Productions podcast.